All right, if I have to hear one more coach say that box jumps are the best way to introduce your clients or your athletes to plyometric or jump training, I'm gonna lose it. And the whole rationale for this is so backwards. Like what I hear coaches say is that, it's a way to introduce your clients to jumping while protecting them from the landing while they don't have the ability to deal with hard landings yet. But if you're so worried about your client having to deal with intense landings early on, then why are we increasing their ability to get higher off the ground without addressing their complete inability to tolerate these landings? And the solution isn't complex, it's actually simple. All we have to do, instead of jumping onto the box, we just get rid of the box and we just get them just jumping up and down off the ground, because all of this software, for lack of a better word, comes factory installed. Like, it's such a great limiter early on in your jump or plyometric training when you can't get too high off the ground yet. This is when we're actually going to be able to softly introduce these landings. And I'm not even saying that we have to go into like maximal intensity leaping or anything like that. We've got a whole bunch of strategies that can help you sort of throttle your client's intensity early on without removing their exposure to landings. Because what you're going to learn today is it's the exposure to the landing, like that's the whole magic sauce of jump or plyometric training. So we want to embrace that from the start, not run away from it while we increase the risk of these potential landings that they're going to have to deal with. So before we dive too far down this rabbit hole, what is the distinction between a jump or a plyometric? So jumping can be done from a static start. So a box jump for sure is a jump. It's not plyometric. So for something to be a plyometric, it must have a landing phase preceding the takeoff phase. So obviously there's no landing before you initiate a box jump, and you don't have to deal with a landing after your box jump because the box takes that away. So that's why it's a jump and not a plyometric. A lot of people will also discuss ground contact times when it comes to plyometric. I think officially it's anything more than a quarter of a second on the ground, and it's no longer considered plyometric. I think this is good overall for intent, but especially if you're not a freak athlete or quite an experienced athlete with a long history of plyometric training, I think getting too caught up in short contact times can really mess with you, especially when you start to get into a lot of, for example, single leg plyometrics, like you're hopping and bounding. Trying to get off the ground too quick can usually just lead to overall crappy technique and things getting unnecessarily sloppy. But like I said, it's more just a good thing to bear in mind. Short-ish contacts on the ground and generally trying to get off the ground a little bit quicker over time as a desired outcome from your plyometric training. One other caveat to get out of the way before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this video: I don't think that box jumps are a bad exercise necessarily. I don't use them at all, to be quite honest, because compared to other exercises that I program, like I do a lot of Olympic weightlifting and just a lot of general strength training with my clients, and they're already really good at doing things like box jumps. So I don't really see what unique qualities we're developing other than just if your clients really like box jumps. I think your client liking any exercise is like a good enough reason to justify programming it. So if it gets you fired up to train jumping, hell yeah. I just think you're missing out on a lot of the unique opportunities that are afforded to us by engaging in other forms of jump or truly plyometric training. Like just trying to steel man it, I think the best place for box jumps in a programming, if I have to really think hard about it, would be like, say my client doesn't want to do any Olympic lifting. That's sort of my go-to for a bit of rate of force development, just general power development. I think you're training a remarkably similar pattern when you do box jumps, because not only do we have this really rapid triple extension pattern, but especially as the box gets higher and higher, we're also training that rapid triple flexion. The same way in a clean or a snatch, we rapidly propel ourselves upwards or the bar upwards and triple extend, and then have to rapidly triple flex after that. There's a bit of a timing and rhythm component. You can get the same thing in arguably a less technical way with a box jump, and you can add load to it as well. So like I said, really cool in that sense. But again, I more put box jumps in the power training category. It does not fit in our speed or our plyometric training category. Like even if all you care about is a vertical jump, to get the most out of your vertical jump, you're gonna have to deal with the forces of an approach. And again, there's a lot of eccentric forces and a lot of landing that you're gonna have to get good at tolerating to be able to make the most of that. So I really don't see the unique value of box jumps for most application. All right, so on average, this is how I introduce people to jumping or plyometric training. Like I said, we don't need any equipment. How good is that? So you don't even need to go into the gym to do it. Great opportunity to get outside, get in the great outdoors. And then we literally just start jumping up and down like this. So I call any two-legged plyometric variation leaping. I get this system from a guy called Matt Watson. You should go check him out on socials. He's really, really good content creator. Sorry. really good coach. Some people will be offended by the content creator label. I'm not personally, I embrace it. And one of the key concerns I think a lot of the box jump crowd like rightly addresses is we don't want to be going too hard with the landings at the start. And your arms can contribute up to 15 to 20% of the overall propulsive forces of a jump, which obviously then are going to contribute to landing forces as well. So if you're pretty good with your arm swing, you're going to get reasonably high off the ground, and if you're worried about your athlete's ability to tolerate that, then you can constrain the arm swing and just put the hands on their hips. If you're dealing with anyone who's like remotely in shape and not a complete geriatric or doesn't have any other like crazy health conditions or injury history, pretty much everyone can just go into some pretty solid leaping from the get-go. But I've trained all ranges of people. I've got geriatric people into plyometrics, so if you want to be a bit of a pansy about it, or you've got someone who needs a bit of a slower entry point, there's so many things we can do, even to the point where, again, like this is why I don't necessarily like fully adhering to all the definitions of a plyometric, because I'm happy for people to do like just really fast squats and standing up. It's, you know, we don't have to get people, if they're really decrepit, leaving the ground immediately. You just have to get them moving faster than they have been previously. So for some people, this is just squatting up and down really quickly, or quicker than they have been doing. It's infinitely scalable, even to the point where, you know, if you're like, oh, there's no way my athlete could handle even hands on hips leaping, we could do it on the wall. And so this is like, wall plyometrics are something that I'm much more likely to use when introducing single-legged locomotive plyometrics like hopping or bounding. But again, you could use it, oh, am I going to destroy the mirror? So you can lay on your back and you could do it against the wall. And again, we're still dealing with landing forces, but they're much less intense than when we've also got to deal with gravity or no wall support. Again, typically, this is where I'm reintroducing people to single-legged variations like hopping, continuous jumping and landing on one leg, or bounding. Okay, so those are all my soft entry points into jumping and plyometric training, from literally just doing a squat pattern a little bit quicker, laying on your back, using the wall for support, doing it with no arms. But like I said, for most of your clients who are in reasonable shape, even if they haven't had any exposure to proper jump or plyometric training before, pretty much everyone is good to go straight into some leaping. Now, before I dive into a whole bunch of other progressions and things you can do to manipulate the intensity of these landings that you're exposing your clients to, here at General Physical Preparation, you're only ever going to have to get introduced or reintroduced to plyometric training once in your life. Once you have introduced plyometric training, the best thing you can do is keep it in your programming forever. I hate it when I hear coaches talk about plyometric training as if it's just a phase. This is where so many people run into these injuries or lack of conditioning to landings in the first place. You never should have stopped jumping since you were a kid. So for the love of God, once you softly reintroduce yourself to plyometric training, please never stop doing it. If you need a guide on what a maintenance dose of plyometric training looks like, in the links down below, I've got my free intro to plyometric training, where it's just 3 10 to 15 minute very brief plyometric sessions a week. I use them for a lot of my athletes' warm-ups. I like to get 3 to 4 exposures a week of plyometric training. Like I said, only takes 10 to 15 minutes, which I realize, even that is a decent chunk of time for some really time-poor athletes who work full-time or whatever the hell else is going on in your life. But I still maintain that it's pretty time efficient, because I'll use it as a warm-up before my leg days, before my big squatting workouts or something like that. I mean, I would argue there's a real complementary nature between plyometric warm-up and then getting into some intense strength training. I find it quite potentiating, but at the very least, it's going to cut down on the amount of warm-up sets that you feel like you need to do before hitting your top sets of squats or whatever your primary leg exercise is on that day. So when it comes to variations for introducing people to plyometrics, early on, your deepest bag that you want to go straight into is leaping. 2-footer jumping and landing. It's incredibly stable. People can tolerate a lot of it. It's also where you're going to be able to introduce the most variation early on, so you can play with forwards and backwards, side to side. You can alternate stances and things like that. Another really useful leaping drill that I like to introduce early on, because the issue when you introduce a lot of people to plyos, they can do like little ones, or then they can go really hard, but they really struggle with that in-between intensity. And it's that medium intensity where I find the most value in plyometric training, where people can tolerate enough of it to get structural changes and get some adaptations, but then it's not so intense that they end up risking just hurting themselves, because the main key when it comes to getting good at plyometric training is just not hurting yourself. Again, a lot of people just go too hard too early, and this is what leads to all your dramas. Getting good at jumping, very simple if you just don't go too hard too early, which again, I know a lot of people are trying to do with the box, but you're kind of just dancing around the entirety of the problem. I would rather address the problem from the jump, not just get them better at leaving the ground, so then all of a sudden their landings, it's just going to be even harder when you actually finally go to address it. Like I said, doesn't make sense. Just a side tangent as well, when I talk about training plyometrics year round, here at General Physical Preparation, we really emphasize a method of periodization or program design where you're training all relevant qualities year round. So nothing important leaves the program. That's the way we like to do it. If you want to learn how to program not just plyos, but every other quality year round and just be a really efficient, effective program designer, check out GPP Level 1. There's links for that course down below. You'll learn my entire training system. All right, let's get into some other techniques that can help you sort of attenuate the intensity of the early parts of your plyometric training journey. So I'm not super high on barefoot training, but plyometrics is one area where I do like to play with it. Again, it usually just forces people to reduce their intensity a little bit and be a little bit more thoughtful about how they're interacting with the ground. And again, shoes are good for the same reason. You can just attack the ground harder, which once you start to tolerate more intense landings is something that you really want to start leaning into, because that's ultimately how you get really good at propelling yourself through the air. But again, for the same reason, it can create unnecessary intensity early on. So getting the shoes off for your plyometric training, again, I don't necessarily go straight to it with the leaping, but it is something that I do with a lot of people early on when I'm introducing them to their bounding or continuous hopping or something like that. But then we also have options. So I do a lot of my leaping stationary, but there's just a bias of mine once I get into single-legged variations that I start doing, moving forward, or making them locomotive. But again, this is something that introduces a lot more forces, especially to the knees. So again, early on, you can sort of alternate or play around with the amount of forward motion, backward motion, and stationary variations. On top of alternating between shoes on and shoes off, you can also play around with different surfaces. So here I'm on like the warm-up or jiu-jitsu mats that people like to use. This is also why, sometimes doing them on concrete, sometimes doing them on grass. Really, really good way to play around with intensity, whether you're trying to increase it or decrease it. Obviously, softer surfaces are going to increase our ground contacts. A lot of people then will go, oh no, well, it's not plyometric. They're on the ground too long when I hop on grass. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you, once you're a fraction outside of what's considered truly plyometric, you're still developing these great qualities, I promise you. So generally speaking, stationary is our lowest intensity of all the forces that we're going to experience with our landings. Starting to move forward, people typically experience more forces going through their body. Moving backwards with your plyometrics is still going to be more forces going through your body than just doing it stationary. Having said that, it does seem to offload the anterior knee. So the same way, if you got anterior knee pain from plyometrics, you don't want to avoid it forever, but it can allow you to maintain a decent dose of plyometric training where you just do your variations going backwards. I would argue, in my experience, it can increase some of the strain on the ankle or the Achilles, but again, it's just another option to attenuate the stress or send it to different parts of the system. Very common question that I've actually changed my answer to somewhat recently. People ask instead of leaping, can I just play around with a skipping rope? I used to not like this because I really like coaching people through the arm swing and people experiencing and learning how to use their arms to increase their efficiency with their jumping and landing. Having said that, nowadays what I like about when people have a skipping rope in their hands is typically they're gonna do it for a lot longer than what people would just do a set of leaps for example. So I don't personally like holding the skipping rope because again, I'm so attached to manipulating that arm swing. But I do like timed sets. So if you've got a client who's a little bit of a lunatic and it's hard for you to throttle their intensity, if you give them a time constraint, they're much more likely to control their intensity. So if you tell someone, hey, I just want to see you maintain an intensity where you can just leap for a minute straight, they're going to stay much more firmly in the pocket. The other variation that I love is, I got this one off Matt Watson as well. One of my favorite drills is doing bounds with a meterage constraint. And that will again force someone back into the pocket. So again, when you introduce people to bounding, usually they just go as hard as possible. Whereas all of a sudden, if you have to bound for 80 to 100 meters, the length of a football field, it just forces people back into the pocket and it forces them to find an intensity that they can actually manage. Oh, sorry as well, I got to sub back into talking about developing dynamic range. Back when I was talking about, some people they can only give you low intensity and then high intensity. They're struggling to find that medium intensity. One of my favorite drills for this and helping them find this medium intensity is crescendo leaps. So I'll prescribe them a set of, anywhere between 10 to 20 leap repetitions. And what I want them to do is start off as light as possible, barely leaving the ground. If it's a set of 20, somewhere around rep 10, they're leaping as hard as possible, but then all the reps on the way up to that and then down from that is sort of forcing them to explore that and identify and develop that medium intensity. So we often refer to this as dynamic range. So this is crescendo leaps, light, building into it, and then going quite hard, and then trying to decrescendo as well. Again, really, really good for exploring your dynamic range. All right, hopefully that is enough tools where you feel like you can safely introduce your clients to plyometric or jump training without being shackled to box jumps. Like I said, the logic and the rationale, it just doesn't make sense. We are not looking to shield our clients from landings altogether at the start. I mean, I realize maybe you get a landing like that jumping on the box, but the landings, so I'll stop talking, you go through. But yeah, so we've got all kinds of options. Start people on 2 legs. If you're really worried about, please, you should not have to worry about exposing people to these sorts of landings early on. Come on. And especially if you're worried about that sort of landing, definitely don't increase their ability to get off the ground further because, like I said, our ability to tolerate landings, it kind of comes factory installed by just your ability to not really get off the ground yet. Don't go messing with that before you've introduced landings. If you're that worried about it, lay on your back and just bounce your feet off the wall. If you're worried about that, just do squats where you try to move a little bit faster. Plyometrics are just as safe and scalable as strength training is. People just don't know how to do it. That's why there's all this fear. So if you're one of those people who's like, oh, you've got to do box jumps, you've got to shield them from the landings. If you're not going to sign up to GPP level 1 and learn how to program this stuff properly, then at least go download my free plyometric training. All right, box jumps aren't bad, but again, the rationale for programming them and justifying them is incredibly poor. Look at me, 2 videos in 1 week. Let's see if I can keep this up.